How's it going? Thanks for stopping by for our weekly Wednesday night stream. We're going to be talking about a whole bunch of stuff, but there's a couple things in particular I want to focus on. I know you guys will have questions about these things too, but I really want to talk about, I'm just making sure our connection's good. I really want to talk about Trump basically saying that he's going to rig the election. 100%. Like, we can mince words, but Trump and Pence are getting ready to rig the election. Maybe they won't need to. Maybe they'll win. I don't think it's impossible that Trump can still win this election legitimately. But they're going to try to rig it if they don't. I already see some people trying to say it's projection. Trump has said, get rid of the ballots, Brennan. That's what he said like 45 minutes ago, an hour. Get rid of the ballots and we'll be fine. Trump, here's Trump's plan. I know we're starting hot, and I see it. Samantha has a super chat. I'll get to that in one sec. Trump's plan is as follows: complain about mail-in ballots. He's been doing that for months without basis, even though this man himself votes by mail pretty much all the time, given that he's president right now, and he's technically a Floridian now, and he votes from Washington. Votes by mail. Complain about mail-in voting. Sow doubt about mail-in voting. Make people think that mail-in voting is secretly a ploy by illegal immigrants to steal your country. Then, on election night, hope that the people that voted by mail a bit later, their votes haven't come in yet because of your attacks on the post office. Then, bank on the fact that it's likely the case that all of the in-person votes will be counted on the first night or, in the overnight. And a lot of the mail-in ballots will still be processing. And then hope you have an early lead. Hope that, you're leading, in a lot of close swing states. That, you have a lead in Florida. You have a lead in Pennsylvania. You have a lead in Ohio. You have a lead in, Michigan, whatever. And then move to invalidate all the outstanding ballots that aren't in yet in the mail still, because you attacked the mail. That's what he's planning to do. And now, not everybody that's voting by mail, of course, is a Democrat, and not everybody that's voting in person is a Republican. We know this, right? Like, it's the simple reality. People know this, but the polling we've seen is very clear. Most people voting by mail are Democrats, are planning to vote for Joe Biden. And most people voting in person are planning to vote for Donald Trump. They're Republicans, they're Trump voters. And so Trump is getting ready to declare mail-in ballots carte blanche invalid or untrustworthy. And so he's hoping for a night one lead, and then those votes will never be counted. And what are you going to do? Go to the Supreme Court, right? Well, the Supreme Court right now is 4-4. Five conservatives and 3 liberals, basically. But one of those conservatives is John Roberts. And so it's probably 4-4 because John Roberts isn't such a conservative necessarily that he would support a coup. He's not Clarence Thomas or Trump's other appointees. And so as an insurance, if Trump puts on a loyalist, by rushing them through the Supreme Court, he could steal the election. Honestly. This is what they're planning to do. This is what they're planning to do. Zachary, we can certainly talk about the Green Party. It's one of the things I noted. We'll be talking about some Canadian stuff tonight, as always. And I'm often guided by people's questions, super chats, where they take us as well. Samantha, on that note, says, no charges for murdering Breonna Taylor. Infuriating. Well, yeah, Samantha, you're 100% right. For those who don't know, maybe you didn't see my video earlier today. Do check that out when the stream is over. But, the reality is that Breonna Taylor was in her apartment and police on a no-knock, ununiformed, warrant, they just basically barged in and murdered her in cold blood. 100%. Police murdered Breonna Taylor. And so we've been waiting forever for charges, and there's been nothing. There's been nothing at all, right? And so eventually we get something, with the settlement. And so when I see that settlement a couple of weeks ago, I believe it was $12 million, I think, well, I'm surprised they got that, but that definitely means there's going to be no justice. That definitely means there's going to be no justice. And so what we saw today is a confirmation of that. There were 3 officers involved, and only one of them, Brett, what's his name again? I don't even know this scumbag's name. Hankison, I think. Yeah, Hankison. Is charged with wanton endangerment. And so what he's being charged for is endangering the other apartments adjacent to Breonna Taylor's. So what they said was the only criminality, the only thing that was indictable in this wasn't murdering Breonna Taylor in cold blood, an unarmed woman who again, police came in and shot up an apartment with a no-knock ununiformed warrant. It was the police officer in the process of slaughtering Breonna Taylor was a little overzealous and shot into other apartments, basically, through the walls and stuff. And so a lot of people are noting, and of course this is a bit glib, but I think there's a truth to it, that, Breonna Taylor's walls are getting more justice than Breonna Taylor did. That the walls being shot have more value than the black woman's life. Right? I mean, look, altruism, look, again, I don't tell people how to vote. But let's be Trump's goal in this election right now, and I'm saying this, is to rig the election if he needs to. This is not 2000, where it was sort of rigged by Bush, but it was only possible to rig it because Florida was literally 200 votes apart, and it was a circumstantial thing. And I don't think George Bush Jr., in 1999 was like, I'm going to rig the presidential election to win. This is Trump as president saying, I want to have all the mail-in ballots excluded. Otherwise, I do not trust the result. I will win if the mail-in ballots are excluded. People have already started voting by mail. So even if those people want to change their minds, they can't, I don't believe. Votes are already in or are on the process of going to the polling stations. This is a level of danger to democracy I haven't seen in a Western country since the 60s or 70s when Greece had a coup and some of these countries had coups, talking about first world nations, right? Like European, EU, North American nations. This is the biggest threat to American democracy in a long time. It's something fundamentally different than what you see from the allegiance of Bush and the Clintons and the Obamas. That's dangerous. If we don't fight that, then that'll lead to an awful society. But if you think there's an equivalence between what, say, Mitt Romney and Jeb Bush and Barack Obama and Michelle Obama and Bill and Hillary Clinton and these types did to basically invalidate the votes of millions of Americans, I don't know. It's not an equivalence. Now, this is not me excusing those people. And again, vote how you want. I do not tell people how to vote. But this idea, and I'm not picking on you in particular, altruism in service, this idea that it's better to let Trump win is absurd. And again, I get the narrative. I understand what you're saying. It's not that I misunderstand it. Remember, the argument in 2016, when Bernie was out, from some people, now this was always a minority of Bernie supporters, the argument was 4 years of Trump, then 8 years of Bernie, and then 8 years of AOC or whoever after. Like, the argument was, if we let Trump win, it's gonna suck, but it'll expose the contradictions of capitalism and American democracy. It will radicalize mainstream Democrats. They will realize the error of their ways, and they will go to Bernie or someone like Bernie in 2016 or in the 2020 primaries. And that did not happen. That did not happen. It didn't. What happened was, Bernie ran, was doing very well, but ultimately did worse than he did 4 years prior, because everyone, not everyone, boomers in particular, and older folks than that, were scared and did not get radicalized by years of Trump, but became far more conservative in their strategy, even as they became more, I guess, progressive in their politics, right? Because if you go back to 2016, the majority of the Democratic Party did not yet support Medicare for all, but they do now, and the majority of Americans do, but they still voted for Biden, and they voted for Biden even harder than they voted for Hillary. Bernie did worse this time. He did worse, far worse in delegates, far worse. Now, the reasons for that, he dropped out earlier, but, it didn't work. It didn't work. Altruism and service, look, no, because Trump is part of all of those same things. Trump is a New York billionaire. Trump is the neoliberal establishment as well. Look, Trump is part of the industrial military complex as well. Everything bad about Pelosi and Schumer and Feinstein and Biden and these ghouls, everything bad about them, Trump is bad at, and then he's bad at additional things. Like, do you get what I'm saying? Like this is not a case where Trump is bad on certain things and then better on others. And so you can have this, really, poison debate, but a debate nonetheless about who is better between the two forces, right? Okay, so Trump is more conservative on this, but more progressive on that than the Democrats. There's nothing. Everyone's like, where was Trump fighting neoliberalism? Where's the raising in minimum wages? Where was it easier to make for workers to join a union? Where did Trump fight, right to work laws and the impositions of neoliberalism? All Trump did was take neoliberalism and make it even more anti-democratic. Right? Well, yeah, again, there's a whole bunch of reasons why the field was bigger, but the field was bigger in 2020, in part because more people were running, and so more people running gets more people initially involved. But the reason it was bigger is everyone was terrified of Trump, and they joined to stop Trump, and they went with the guy they thought could stop Trump. Now, again, I still really believe that Biden can win, but Bernie would have had a better chance of winning. I believe that. But the point is, fundamentally, that people got scared. People got scared. 4 years of Trump did not make Americans more willing to tear down the system. 4 years of Bernie advocating for his policies have made people more ideologically progressive. There's a reason why Biden, I don't believe he actually supports it, but there's a reason why Biden now has to lie about a public option. 4 years ago, Hillary didn't have to lie about supporting a public option. She didn't need to. She didn't need to lie about that to win the primary. She didn't. Now the Democrats needed to lie about Medicare for all and the public option. The right-wing position was now Medicare for all who want it. That was the right-wing position in the primary now. And so I get that, but it didn't change the fact that people just got terrified. They got terrified. So I don't buy it. Insofar as Trump is planning to steal the election, let's say he doesn't steal it. Let's just say, and he just wins the election. You will, like, the argument in 2024 will not be we need to go left wing again. They will do the same thing again, and voters will be equally terrified, if not more so. We have to remember how all of these progressive voices have risen, right? We have to remember this. Bernie Sanders did not become prominent out of the Bush administration. He did not become prominent from the Bush years. It was not his opposition to Iraq that made him popular. What made Bernie popular was having Democrats in power suck. That's where Bernie became Bernie. Like Bernie's been around forever, but the Bernie that millions of people knew and loved. People didn't really know who he was before 2015. Most people, right? You know, was 8 years of Democratic Party rule making people think, holy fuck, this isn't even that good. Now, everyone's like, it doesn't matter, we need any Democrat will do. After 8 years of Democrats, people were more willing to experiment. Again, Bernie after 4 years of Trump did worse than Bernie after 8 years of Barack Obama, in a primary. And AOC, Ilhan Omar, Rashida Tlaib, Cori Bush, Jamal Bowman, Mondaire Jones, none of these people came to Congress defeating Trumpers. They all came to Congress defeating tired neoliberal hacks. So from my perspective, I think it's easier for the left, at least in the US, this might not apply to every country. It might be easier to go up against the Biden regime because the hypocrisies are there and the excuses, at least in part, fall by the wayside. Right? Because if the theory was that having Trump in power will radicalize people and we can make greater strides then the argument would be that in all these deep red districts, these R plus 30s, they would be, the working class people in those districts would be switching immediately to people like AOC. But you're not seeing AOCs and Bernie Sanders and Ilhan Omars and Rashida Tlaibs getting elected in rural Alabama. Why is that? Because just because Trump is in power does not mean people will be radicalized. Right? That's my view. So, I don't know. Yes, of course, blue lives matter. The problem is blue lives think their lives matter more than other lives, and they don't. That's the problem. Yeah, we're talking accelerationism a little bit. Joseph says, and we're going to get to this too, because we're going to rip some neoliberals tonight too. Libs using hashtag listen to Bernie on Twitter, and I can't. Yeah, that was another thing I had in the headline, but then Trump went and said, I'm going to do a coup, so I had to push this down to the description. But basically, listen to Bernie is trending on Twitter, and it has been for much of the day. And it's based on this ad that sort of took his, and this is why I'm not going to play it, but it sort of took his speech at the DNC and cut it into like a 2-minute ad where he basically warns about the dangers of Trump to democracy. And none of it is wrong. Bernie is 100% right, and he's not being, dramatic or what's the word I'm looking for? He's not being hyperbolic. He's not. But what you're seeing from the Democrats is all of a sudden they're like, hashtag we gotta listen to Bernie, Bernie has warned us. Everyone needs to unite behind Joe Biden. And I'm like, where were you fucks for the last 5 years? Bernie Sanders was one of the first people to warn about the dangers of Donald Trump. When most people were laughing about Donald Trump, Bernie was warning people. Because Bernie understood the context in which someone like Donald Trump can win. And it's not everything is generally okay, context. It was the roots of a sick, racist society that has long historical issues. But rooted in the fact that the Democrats were bragging about how things were always great. They were bragging about how the economy was hot in Seattle and New York and Southern California and in other blue state big cities. And then there were large swaths of swing states that are industrial or former industrial that are not seeing the same kind of broad prosperity. And those happen to be the sorts of states that the Democrats need to win the election. Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin. They don't need to win Ohio if they win the other three, but Ohio is also one of those states, in general at least. So these are all states that they lost. And three of those by small margins because they didn't understand it. And Bernie was warning folks every step of the way. Here's what's gonna happen. Trump is going to pretend that he cares about the common working man and woman, that he wants to make America great again for working people, that the Democratic Party elite doesn't care about the working class. And that's not a lie. That's true. Trump's disingenuous in saying it, but it's true. That they don't care about working people. They've signed bad trade deals. They've, every opportunity they've chosen to outsource good jobs, blah, 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 blah. So vote for me. I'm going to shake things up. And I'm different from other Republicans because I actually, I'm not going to just sell you out like Ted Cruz and Jeb Bush and all of these big business Democrats. And I'm a big businessman, but I'm different than these other guys. And the argument worked. And everyone laughed about it. Everyone laughed. Everyone. Remember the Democrats behind the scenes. Remember that. They were like, we need to see Trump win the primary so we can win the election. Like, they were hoping for Trump to win. Like, Hillary and her team wanted Donald Trump to be the nominee because they thought it would be like a cakewalk, right? And it wasn't. It wasn't. Maybe she would have lost to Ted Cruz or Jeb Bush as well. I don't know. I don't know. Maybe she would have lost by a bigger margin, or maybe those guys wouldn't have been able to convince working class Obama voters to come to them, so Hillary would have beaten those guys. I don't know. The point is, they wanted Trump because they didn't fear him. It was Bernie that understood Trump was bad. Now, they say listen to Bernie. They hadn't listened to Bernie until just now when he happens to endorse Biden. But they're not listening to Bernie about what it's going to take to beat him. Like, insofar as you're going to beat Trump, you need mass turnout. Because here's the thing. Trump can rig the election. But the United States is not so far gone that if there's a clear mandate for Biden, that it'll be ignored. If Biden wins Florida, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and he's winning them all by at least 2 or 3 points, like Trump won't be able to get by that. What really creates issues is if it's close, and it could be close. And so one of the ways you fight that potential is you drive mass turnout. Because when young people vote, and when most racialized people vote, they vote Democrat. Right? Like, you find an average 30-year-old who doesn't vote. And if you put them in the polling booth, and you said, look, you have to cast a vote, most of them are voting Democrat. Right? Same thing with people in their 20s. Same thing even with basically anyone under 40. Anyone under 40. but they don't turn out as much. And so Bernie's right. Find a way to energize these people. Give them something to vote for. They already have something perfectly fine to vote against. Like, I think, voting against Donald Trump is an admirable vote. Like Cornel West has said, look, I'm not really voting for Biden. My vote is a vote against Donald Trump. Even Nina Turner said the same thing with the voting for a bowl of the S word versus half a bowl of the S word. But half a bowl is 50% less, 50% less shit, right? Like, you know what I mean? I don't know how else to put it. So, I don't know. That's where we're at. They want to tweet hashtag listen to Bernie. So they want to tweet that, but then they don't want to do the work of actually listening to Bernie, hearing what Bernie says, and then saying, okay, here's what Bernie said. Here are the consequences of this. How do we actually move forward? And they're not there. They're not there. Right? So yeah, I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know what's going to happen. Like, that's my real fear, is that Trump knows most people that are voting by mail are not his people, and he knows most people that are voting in person are his people. So he has a direct partisan desire to invalidate the mail-in votes, or at least delay them and then try to say, oh, it's too late, we can't count them, the results already in, we have to put the election behind us and move forward as a country, blah, 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 blah. And so I don't know. I'm not at the point, see, I'm torn, because, like, I'm starting to wonder, honestly, if, I'm starting to wonder, what's happening? Like, guys, I don't know. I'm really starting to, at some point, and I don't want to have this discussion yet because I don't want to delegitimize it. But, if Trump is really going to go after mail-in voting that hard, at what point do you have to start telling people to go vote in person, even if it's not physically the safest option? In some parts of the country, it might not be a huge risk. You just go, you quickly vote. Maybe you can go when it's, there's not as many people. You come in, you come out, and you wear your mask, etc. But, honestly, I don't know. If Trump is basically saying your mail-in vote's going to get shredded, then, do you mail in vote? I don't know. But see, I don't want to scare people into thinking that, their mail-in vote's not going to count and then they don't vote. But that's something that I think we all have to keep an eye on. Is how that's going to happen. I think the best thing you can do for the Americans here is, if you are going to vote by mail, vote now. Vote as early as you possibly can. And check again to make sure your ballot got in as much as you can. Because if you vote early enough, your ballot will get there in time almost certainly. And then your vote should be counted on election night. Whereas if you vote on the last possible mail-in voting day, your ballot will get there later and it might not be counted on the night. And if you do live in Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Florida, Ohio, North Carolina, these sorts of states that are gonna be swing states, almost certainly, then I would be concerned. I'll be concerned. Justin says, hey, Christo, I just wanted to thank you for retweeting my tweet from last week about my personal life. This past month has been hell for me, and your live streams have served as an educational and entertaining distraction. So thank you. Keep going. Justin, thanks for that. Thank you for the very generous support, of course. And I'm glad to know that I'm here to help. This is something I look forward to every week. Live streaming. It's something where a lot of the people who are some of my most dedicated viewers, I can interact with you guys, because there's lots of people that will watch one of my videos here or there. But the people who watch the streams, at least most of the weeks, are pretty dedicated viewers. And I like to just like be able to interact with you all. So Justin, thanks for that. And I hope you're doing okay. And as always, feel free to reach out if you just need to chat or what have you, because insofar as I can find some time, at least we can do that. So if mail-in votes are counted late, but like I don't know what the policy is going to be with votes in well in advance, if it's going to be different this time. Like, for instance, in some of the nights with primaries, they did mail-in voting, but they were early, and then ballots were counted, and most of the primaries we've seen during the primary cycle were able to be completed on the night. A couple of the really, really close ones took some time. The Charles Booker, Amy McGrath one took some time, but even ones that were relatively close, like the Cori Bush, Lacey Clay one. That one. I mean, we went late, but that one was called, a few hours after polls closed. Like, that's gonna be an issue. That's really gonna be an issue. That's my major concern. I don't know. Maybe I'm overreacting. Maybe this is bluster. But like, why would Trump say this? Because him saying it, like, why does Trump try to upplay this other than him doing it? Because let's think about like Trump politically. If Trump basically says, I want to cause a coup, that's getting even people like me to be like, oh man, I don't know. Like, I think you need at all costs to defeat Donald Trump. And so more and more people that were like Bernie or Busters even, I don't think I would ever say that. I was sort of ambivalent on what people were going to do after the primary. But are like, man, Trump should probably be defeated. So why would Trump do this except for the fact to normalize what he's going to do? To keep saying the mail-in ballots are rigged, and then on election night, the rigged mail-in ballot shouldn't count. I mean, I don't know. I get with Trump. I get what you're saying, Windy Melly. Like, Trump is, to a certain degree, a bit boisterous, and he says a lot of things, and he either doesn't mean some of the things, or, he can't do those things. Like, I don't know. I don't know where what is him just blasting about, and what is him signaling to people that, like, this is cool. To a certain degree, though, when you're president, what you say has, like, direct impacts, right? Like, I get what you're saying, like we're outraged about what Trump says more than what he does, or what have you, or, we get outraged preemptively in some cases, and yeah, that's probably at least somewhat true. But when the president says certain things, they have consequences. As much as him doing anything. For instance, when Trump said to people like that Kyle Rittenhouse was acting in self-defense, even though he was illegally transporting firearms across the state line, that was Trump telling his supporters, if you murder Black Lives Matter protesters, me and Tucker and Kayleigh McEnany and Laura Ingraham and Janine Pirro and Sean Hannity, we're going to call you a small little boy who was defending himself from the big bad Black Lives Matter terrorists. And so Trump didn't do anything there, But what he said will cost lives. Like, when Trump says the coronavirus is essentially a hoax, he didn't do anything, but what he said killed people. And so, like, what the president says matters. Right? Like, you know, it matters. Yeah, Samantha and I guess we're on the same brainwave because we're both talking about Rittenhouse there, basically. Comrade, I haven't listened to it yet. I'm so swamped, Comrade Internet, like just with childcare and things like that, like, I basically have a few hours a week to not do this and other things. And so I just haven't gotten around to it. But look, it could happen here. It could. And like, we talked about it a few weeks ago where we looked at Chris Hedges and how he explained democracy could die in the United States. And it was a very compelling argument because, much like our discussion last week, where, and I was part of this, we got bogged down in, is the United States moving towards fascism? What is fascism? Is fascism one size fits all? Or, like, will 2020 American fascism be different in a lot of key ways from the fascism of Spain, Italy, Germany in the 20s, 30s, 40s, whatever, you know, and onward? Like, is it going to be more like Pinochet's regime in Chile, which technically wasn't fascist under most academic definitions, but was nonetheless anti-democratic and dictatorial? And so what he argued was that fascism in the United States is going to look a lot more like the United States currently does than Nazi Germany did, at least in broad strokes. You're likely always going to see the remainder of some voting. You're going to see, like, the remnants of a supposedly free media. And so I do worry that, like, while A Handmaid's Tale or like, you know, literal rise of the swastika on the White House is not something I expect, I could see the functional end of democracy in the United States. I could. They're already somewhat there, just by the nature of the Senate, for instance, and the nature of the Electoral College, right? Where rural white people in South Dakota's vote count 35 times more, basically, than a voter in California. Right? Like, the green pill mindset, by that point, he had already murdered someone. And again, let's take the logic I have heard from fellow right-wing illuminaries like Mr. Crowder. Mr. Crowder, in decrying all of these protesters, and every time a black man gets gunned down by the cops, he says, if you're doing any crime, you can no longer be innocent. Basically, if the police kill you and you're doing any crime, they're justified in killing you. Like, the argument was, oh, Jacob Blake had some charges pending or whatever. I don't fucking know or care. But that's his argument. Kyle Rittenhouse was by default illegally transporting assault rifles across state lines. And in the state he was in, it is legal to carry it, to have an AR-15 in that state, but not if you're a minor. So, Kyle Rittenhouse, under the logic of these supporters, had it coming and deserved to be murdered. Right? That's the logic. Here's the thing. He had already murdered someone by that point. And last time I checked, getting kicked by someone does not necessarily bring forward using an AR-15 as a proportionate response. I don't know. He murdered somebody before that. Kyle Rittenhouse murdered somebody, the green pill. He murdered somebody. It doesn't matter what happens when he's running away after murdering somebody. If you shoot somebody with a fucking gun and then you're running in the dark towards people, because it is reasonable to assume that they will shoot other people. He murdered somebody. Murder with a gun. He murdered them. And again, regardless of what he did, under the logic of the cons, which apparently on this one you agree with, Green Pill Mindset, they have often argued that whenever you're committing any crime, you cannot be innocent of these sorts of things. And he was illegally transporting firearms across state lines as a minor, illegally carrying that gun. Why was he wearing gloves, Green Pill Mindset? Why was he wearing gloves? Were those making me shoot better, the gun gloves? Were those, it was a little chilly in the middle of summer, plastic gloves? Were those newfangled microchip air-conditioned plastic gloves? Why was he wearing the gloves, Green Pill Mindset? Why was he wearing the gloves? Why would you wear, let me know in the chat, why would you wear plastic gloves while holding an instrument of mass death? Why would you hold that? Let me know, guys. Let me know in the chat. Why would you wear those gloves? Like, I don't know. Is the gun hot? But those are like secret heat-resistant plastic gloves? Why would you wear plastic gloves? Why would you wear them? Do 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 do. Okay, no one's actually going to say it. Thank you, Samantha. I was actually waiting for... I was being rhetorical, but I was also waiting. Yes. To hide the bull... Look. 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 Here's the thing. He was wearing gloves so he could do crimes. If you're an innocent, law-abiding American citizen who loves his or her gun, and you want to carry that gun at all cost, like you have a right. I can disagree with that right to go get a Big Mac with a bazooka on your back. Which, remember that guy did that? It was all over the internet. I can disagree with that right, or you could agree with it, but it's legal in many parts of the United States. So, if it's legal, if there's nothing wrong with having that gun, and you're fully convinced that you're only going to be using it if needed in self-defense, why do you go to this with plastic gloves on? What's the Occam's razor? Right? And I know in a court of law, this alone wouldn't be enough to convict. But in the court of Christo, I don't need beyond a reasonable doubt. I need preponderance of evidence. And from my perspective, when you go to one of these things and you have plastic gloves on while holding a gun, it's to hide your fingerprints. It's to hide that. There's no other reason. Again, if he was there to quote-unquote defend property and he was there as a proud defender of the Second Amendment, then he and it was legal for him to have the weapon. Like, maybe the argument you could make is he knew it was illegal for him to have the gun because he knew he was underage and he knew it was illegal to bring it across state lines. So he wasn't planning to murder anybody illegal, but he knew that the act of him having the gun then and there was illegal. And so he wanted to be able to chuck it if needed, but that maybe. But he obviously knew he was either doing something wrong by holding the gun, period, or he was about to do something wrong by using that gun to shoot somebody. Like, that's like... Right? Like... I don't know. Like, I'm actually going to Google this. Kyle Rittenhouse plastic gloves. Let me see. What is it saying here? Look at me. Look. They're not surgical gloves. Well, let me look this up. Okay, I want to see if like anybody has actually explained why this, like, what's a reason why you wear gloves except for to hide crimes. I mean, look, I'm not seeing anybody suggest, like, wearing these gloves and giving a reason. I don't know. Was he a medic? I don't know. But, like, I don't know. Like, here's the thing. I don't know if this applies here, but isn't there a thing where... Now, maybe you can explain this to me. We got any lawyers in the chat? Where, like, if you rob a bank and you have a gun and the gun accidentally goes off, you can't claim it was an accident because it was in the process of committing a crime. Is there a name for that? And so, because Kyle Rittenhouse was in the process of committing a crime, namely illegally possessing a firearm that was illegally transported across state lines, how could he even claim to use it in self-defense? Isn't the act of committing a felony with the gun, like explain, like, I don't know. What's the like, what's the rationale there? Dwayne, even if that's the case, that he was given the gun, he's not allowed to have it. He's too young in that state. Would it be manslaughter? Well, let me see. I'm going to I remember hearing about this. I mean, well, here's just one example from the New York Times where they basically said that a robber of a bank whose gun went off accidentally in the process of committing his crime, but didn't even hurt anyone, got a higher sentence because he used the gun in the act of a felony, in the act of a crime. Kyle Rittenhouse used his gun in the act of committing a crime. Again, a gun he brought from across state lines, or whatever you want to call it, was not allowed to possess. I don't know. We're getting sidetracked on this, frankly, or more accurately, we're wasting enough time on it. Kid's a murderer. Now, I'm of the mind, personally, that 17-year-olds shouldn't be charged as an adult. That makes me controversial. Unless you're going to give 17-year-olds the right to vote, you should not give them the penalties of an adult. But that's neither here nor there. But he's definitely a murderer. So, it is what it is. Under U.S. law, if a black boy did what Kyle Rittenhouse did, he would go to jail for life. 100%. So, I get it. But, 17-year-olds are still children, technically. So, another couple things kind of shifting to Canada for a little bit. I want to talk a bit about the Green Party. Some people asked about it. But, basically, the Green Party in Canada is attacking one of its more progressive candidates. The Green Party in Canada has and I'm just going to drop a link here. This is from Ricochet. They just posted this article. A lot of good reporting. The Green Party in Canada is a eco-capitalist party. And no one would dispute that right now. Either people like that it's an eco-capitalist party, or the people trying to change it acknowledge that that's what's wrong with it. And so basically what's happening is one of the candidates, Mariam Haddad, suggested that people not vote for the British Columbia Green Party in the upcoming BC provincial election. Like in the British Columbia provincial election. She said that. Whether you agree with her or disagree with her, she said that. And then now she's being booted from the contest for that. Like, like Haddad says here, I have been told my removal was related to my failure to endorse the British Columbia Greens despite past precedent and their separate status. So, that was in Passage. So, basically, the Green Party wants to have it both ways. The Green Party is not a linked party like the NDP. The NDP in Canada is a federated party, which means if you're a member of the federal NDP, you're also an automatic member of the provincial NDP in your province. So if you live in Ontario, you cannot just be a member of the federal NDP, but not the Ontario NDP. You gotta be a member of both. That's our party. Not all parties work like that in Canada. You can only be a member of the federal Liberals and then be a member of no party at all provincially, or be a member of another party provincially. And so the Greens do not have that federated structure. So technically, there is no formal link between the British Columbia Greens and the Canada Greens, the Green Party of Canada. And so what Maryam Haddad did was basically say, I can't support either the NDP or the Green Party in the BC election because neither party is progressive enough or environmentalist enough for me. I'm going to support the new party, which frankly I don't think is going to do well, to be honest, the BC Eco-Socialist Party. And when she said that, apparently she was booted because she didn't support the BC Greens. Now here's the deal. The Green Party loves to absolve itself of what its provincial wings do by saying, we don't control the provincial wings, we're not the same party. The BC Greens are not the federal Greens. So when the BC Greens do something bad, like vote down a policy to make it easier for workers to join a union, the federal Greens will say, oh, well, we can't speak to that. They're a different party. But then when they want to attack the NDP based on something in BC, they'll say, you have to respond to this. You're a federated party. Ergo, whatever BC does, Jagmeet Singh has a responsibility to respond. And so they want to play that card both ways, right? They want to play that both ways, right? And so by her not endorsing the Green candidate, they're basically trying to punish her, even though she's taking a stand against a party that technically isn't part of their party. If that makes any sense to people, right? I don't know if that makes any sense to folks, but that's basically what's happening, right? That's basically what's happening. Now, BC before Christ. BC is British Columbia. It's the westernmost province in Canada. For those that, if it helps, basically, if it helps, it's the province directly north of Washington State. And it has a BC NDP government right now. The NDP is the most left-wing party, or at least the most left-wing party in Canada that wins any significant amount of seats. And so that's what happened. But we have to remember, and Canadians will know what I'm talking about here, is that when the last federal election came around, the Green Party was running, and the Green Party leader at the time was Elizabeth May. She's the outgoing leader right now. She's actually already stepped down as leader, but there's currently an interim leader. So she was the last full-time leader for the Green Party. And basically, she's come out and she said, she's come out and she said, this is inappropriate that she's endorsing this other party that's not the Green Party. It's bad. We have to stand together. And so what she did, and I see Matthew Daniels here, who definitely knows this, being from BC, is that what she did in BC in 2019 was endorse an independent candidate, Jody Wilson-Raybould. She was a former Trudeau cabinet minister who resigned out of principle, and rightfully so. I think she did the right thing. I have a lot of respect for Jody Wilson-Raybould in a nonpartisan sense, but she was running as an independent against a Green candidate, and Elizabeth May effectively endorsed her candidate's opponent over her own candidate. So it would be like, Joe Biden endorsing a Republican running for, say, the Senate this time, and then expelling somebody who did the same thing. Right? It's hypocritical, right? It's totally hypocritical. Yeah, I don't know if May has made a formal endorsement in Astoria. I'm not following the race too closely, to be honest. But I know she does not want Lascaris or Haddad or Kuttner to win. Like, that's what I do know. I'm sure that she has her preferences, but would be fine with most of the rest. I think she wants Paul to win, Anne-Marie Paul. I think the eco-socialists are just like we're the NDP but lefter and we're the Greens but greener. I don't know. I'm not following them. I can't get invested in so many new parties because just the odds are new parties fail. New parties fail harder than new restaurants, right? Like, some of them will succeed and they'll go on to glory. But there's a reason why Canada at the federal level has 5 parties, and 3 of them are from before the Second World War, right? There's a reason why the Conservatives, I know they split and merged again, so technically this Conservative Party is only from 2003 or whatever, but the Conservatives go back to 1867, the the Liberals go back to 1867, and the NDP goes back through the CCF goes back to 1932, and then the Greens and the Bloc are both relatively young parties, and the Greens have only ever won like 4 seats total across all elections federally, and so most new parties fail. Like the PPC. I mean, I don't know if they're technically dead, but yeah, they didn't win a seat. Most parties fail. And so what you're seeing is them basically punishing Maryam Haddad, who is one of the left-wing candidates running. I don't think she has as much support as Lascaris based on what I've seen, but she's certainly, doing well. She certainly has a campaign. And have basically booted her out of the contest because she wouldn't endorse the BC Greens, even though the former Green leader did essentially the same thing in endorsing somebody over her own party. Again, that's even worse because the BC Greens are not the federal Greens. They're not the same party. They have similar branding. A lot of their membership does probably overlap, don't get me wrong, but they are not the same party. Okay, yeah. So somebody shared the felony murder rule. Now this is at least in California, but basically what it says is that it's automatically first degree murder if you kill someone in the process of committing certain crimes, even if in other contexts it would be manslaughter. So for instance, in the process of committing a burglary, and you could technically say, I didn't mean to kill the person, but my gun went off accidentally, it's still automatically first-degree murder, even if the usual intent to make something first-degree murder isn't there. That's the argument. So in this particular case, I'm not sure. It gives a bunch of things. It says here, in the case of arson, rape, carjacking, robbery, burglary, mayhem, kidnapping, train wrecking. I'm guessing that's probably one from the history books, and firing a gun at a vehicle, of a moving vehicle, to somebody outside the vehicle. And so I don't know what mayhem is. Maybe it would apply under mayhem. I'm not sure what mayhem is. Let's look it up federally. Okay, the United States here. It says here, as of 2008, 46 states have a felony murder rule, under which a felony murder is generally first-degree murder. In 24 of those states, it is a capital offense. The law does apply in Wisconsin. They do have a felony murder rule. It applies to battery, sexual assault, false imprisonment, kidnapping, arson, burglary, carjacking, or robbery. So, I guess under this definition, he likely would not be guilty of an inherently dangerous felony. Zach, I'll probably follow the two by-elections a little bit. One of those, York is likely going to be a Liberal romp. Toronto Centre is still going to be difficult. The Liberals will probably be able to get a star candidate to run there. I hope the NDP does find somebody good to run, because it is a riding provincially held by Suze Morrison, by the Ontario NDP. But in the last few federal elections, it was staunchly Liberal. And so I wonder if, because Toronto Centre is such a high-profile riding, it's easy to find superstar candidates for a governing party. So I do wonder what's going to happen there. That is where initially Chrystia Freeland won her by-election, and then moved over, and then Bill Morneau ran there. So two of the highest profile MPs under Trudeau have been in Toronto Centre, at least for a time. And so it'll be interesting to see what happens. My inkling is that the Liberals hold on to the seat. If you look at the last federal election in Toronto Centre, and again, by-elections can be a little bit weird. Toronto Centre by-election, the last federal election, the Liberals won with, let me see. The Liberals won with 57% of the vote, to the NDP at 22%, Conservatives at 12%, and the current Anne-Marie Paul, who is the vying to be Green leader, she finished 4th there with 7%. The Liberals have a rather large advantage in Toronto Centre. So I would suspect both of those will be held by the Liberals. Let me just check York. Let me see. York. York Centre. Okay, let me look this up. York Centre is another riding in Toronto. Not quite as in the center of the city. It's more on the edge of Toronto proper, but still well within the city. This riding has been very much historically Liberal. For instance, it was Liberal from 1962 until 2011, where it went Conservative for that one election, and then it's been Liberal since. And currently, the Liberals have, they won with 50% of the vote, about 14 points better than the Conservatives, with the NDP below 10. So, both of those are relatively safe for the Liberal Party. I don't expect either to face a serious challenge. Yes, and that's a thing. That's what's very frustrating about ridings like that, is that there are a lot of people who are essentially progressives who do not understand how our system works. Now, there's strategic voting, right? Like, we have this argument with Biden, right? Like, there are states where you have to, if you are a strategic voter, you have to consider it. And then there are other places where it doesn't matter. Like, if you live in Oregon, you could probably vote Green, and it doesn't matter. You can give your vote to the Green Party. The Democrats will win Oregon by a large margin. And here in Canada, there's a lot of people that don't want the Conservatives to win. They might have a preference of the other parties, but they identify themselves as anything but conservative. And there are certain parts of the country where it's the Conservatives versus either the Liberals or the NDP, and the argument is they all need to get behind one of those parties to defeat the Conservative. But There are also a lot of ridings in the country and a lot of big cities, for example, that are actually NDP versus liberal. Basically, the center-right liberals versus the left, like the left NDP. And so a lot of people don't get that. A lot of people don't like, so you look at a riding like that and they'll say, obviously, this is an election where I need to vote to stop Andrew Scheer from becoming prime minister. I'm going to vote for Justin Trudeau. But in that riding, the Conservatives are not a factor. They cannot win. And so you actually don't have to vote strategically, right? Even if you are a strategic voter, and I'm not one. I vote NDP every time, no matter what, no matter where. I will always do that. Never voting Green, never voting Liberal. The only place I might not vote NDP would be for Quebec Solidaire, provincially in Quebec. I've said this before. And so it's very frustrating. It's very frustrating. Here in Kingston, we face the same issue often. In the last federal election in Kingston, we actually finished second. But the Liberals were so far ahead that there was no, like, people didn't need to strategically vote for them. They could have likely voted for the NDP. The Liberals got about 50% of the vote. The NDP in the 23 and the Conservatives 21. All of those strategic votes for the Liberals could have gone to the NDP, and we might have been able to win it. And upwards of 30-40% of Liberal voters in the last election, under a lot of polling, said they voted for the Liberals strategically. Like, Sean, like, I get what you're saying, Sean. The NDP don't like it when you point out that they support fracking in the RCMP. Yeah, look, here's the thing, though. And anybody who denies this is disingenuous. There is no party that tolerates as much criticism from its members as the NDP. It doesn't do it enough, and our party sucks a lot. But look what the Greens do to people that disagree with them. Right now, Leah Gazan is ripping the BC NDP for putting in Nathan Cullen in discordance with the equity mandate for his riding in northern BC for the upcoming BC election. If it was the Green Party, they would have booted her by now. That's what they've shown with Liz May. They will boot you if you do not fall lockstep with the BC Greens. That's what they did to Maryam Haddad. The NDP is the party that tolerates the most dissent of all major federal Canadian parties. There is no comparison. And so, yes, while we suck, yes, while our party, in a sense, fails to live up to our values of reconciliation, while our party is cowardly on Palestine, while our party is far too timid on the capitalist crisis and the climate crisis, there is no other party in this country that tolerates dissent like our party. And I include in that, like, you think like the Communist Party of Canada would tolerate this sort of dissent? Historically, they certainly haven't. Do you think the Liberals tolerate this dissent? Look what they did to Wilson Raybould and Philpott and César Chavan. Do you think the Conservatives tolerate it? They kicked Maxime Bernier, whatever you think about him, they kicked him out of Shadow Caucus because he didn't support supply management. The NDP is the best party in this country, and it's not even close. And I throw in that all the minor parties that don't matter. It's not even close. The only comparison is perhaps Quebec Solidaire. And we still suck. I cannot underline that enough. The NDP is the only party where someone like me can make videos critical of the party, has written dozens of articles over the last 5-6 years, and dozens of Facebook, well, if you count all my Facebook and Twitter rants, critical of the NDP. I defend it, but I also criticize it. You've heard me do it on stream here. And then still get MPs to come on your stream and talk with you. I've had Green and Gazan and Nikki Ashton and, other people I've had discussions provincial level NDPers potentially coming on at some point. All right. Okay, so like honestly, yeah, we suck, man. Don't get me wrong. John Horgan, he's wrong to call an election. I think it's not the most egregious thing because they have been in a minority parliament for a long time, but he's wrong to do it, right? The BC Greens are wrong to ignore their equity mandate and put in Nathan Cullen. They're wrong to do it. John Horgan is wrong to have, and it's not simply on Horgan because the RCMP is shared responsibility in that sense, but it was wrong of Horgan and Trudeau to use the RCMP to quash Indigenous protest against in British Columbia. Right? It's wrong that the NDP continues to tolerate Israeli apartheid. But the difference is, if I was a liberal or a green or a conservative and I said that, I wouldn't be welcomed as somebody who gets to interview MPs on their channel because they would see me as a traitor and I wouldn't be allowed to talk. Remember, this is a Green Party that kicked someone out because they endorsed somebody in an election they weren't running. I don't know. Question mark says, incrementalism is not how you stop fascism. History says otherwise. Vote, but looking at trends of 2020, it's hard to believe Trump losing is how it ends. I mean, it's an interesting debate, right? I mean, it's a hard question to answer maybe, because have there been countries that if votes went different ways, they would have slipped into totalitarianism? And so is it a question of incrementalism and electoralism never stop fascism, or is it just that the cases in which it did, we sort of ignore? Right? You get what I'm, if that makes any sense, right? Like if the United States would have never elected Abraham Lincoln and the radical Republicans, would the Civil War have even happened? And ergo, would the United States have maintained slavery indefinitely or for another 50 years or whatever? And in that sense, electoralism wasn't the only factor, but it might have caused a civil war, but a war that probably needed to happen given the context. I don't know. I mean, I get what you're saying, but I'm not sure. The context for what caused fascism in a lot of in the European countries existed in other European countries, and yet they didn't slip into fascism. And maybe the electoralism plays no role in that, or not a very big one. But I wonder if it played some role. Why didn't France, until it was conquered, why didn't it slip into fascism? Why didn't other European countries, why didn't the Benelux countries? Why didn't Britain, which was also in dire straits? And there were a variety of reasons. It could have been the nature of the governments elected. I don't know. I don't know. And CMT63 with the support there, with the super chat. Thank you so much. I don't see a question, CMT, but thank you so much. I very much appreciate it. If you do have a question, I'm certainly happy to answer it. But no, I mean, I don't know. It's an interesting question. I definitely think there's something to be said for, how is voting going to get us out of this, right? Because yeah, I see the argument. If Trump's gonna rig it, he's gonna rig it. And if he rigs it, then, like, how do you stop that? Right? I don't know. But, you know, like Brandon makes a good point, and I think that is fair. That Britain and not to glorify British and French democracy, but those countries had richer, longer democratic cultures than Italy and Spain and Germany, and because of that, it might have resisted things. And of course, Germany being a losing country in the war, it might have affected things, right? Britain and France being like along with the US, being the quintessential liberal democracies, maybe had more robust, not just in terms of voting, but also like free press, things like that were in a better position to resist it. Question mark says Russian Revolution shaped Europe entirely. Yeah, 100%. That's very fair. But you know what causes fascism essentially is the middle class fearing that the current political order can't stop, can't rule, and they fear something else. And when I mean middle class, I don't necessarily mean the broad middle class as in what we refer to today, which is that like everyone is basically middle class, but the particular class of like middle class professionals. When I say that, I really mean like upper middle class people that are definitely richer than average. They turned to fascism when capitalism failed and they didn't want socialism. And they gave their consent to fascism in a sense. Maybe in France and Britain, it didn't happen in that way because the countries were not going through such profound crises as, say, Germany, obviously, and Italy and Spain, where they didn't. And of course, Russia had a Bolshevik revolution and went in an opposite direction. Karen Sita says, I see thumbs down. It means Christo's big enough to attract trolls. Let's not forget to like the video. Thank you so much, Karen. I wasn't even checking that. I can't really see. It doesn't show dislikes on my live feed. But I'm guessing that, people are scrolling by it and maybe hitting a dislike and then leaving. Or maybe these are some of the trolls staying by. I'm not sure. I did notice. I don't know if you guys saw, but definitely check it out. I made what is definitely my most disliked video ever. And I do want to, if you haven't watched it, I know a lot of my supporters didn't watch it because if they did, it would have gotten more likes. But this is a video I made criticizing the George Soros conspiracy theorists. And it has like a 92% dislike rate. So, if you haven't watched this video that I just dropped in the link, do watch it and give it a like to help it get up there. Give it a full watch through. The video performed very well. It's so far it's gotten about 63,000 views or so. But my goodness, it is by far my most disliked video of all time. And it's not even close. It's not even close. At all. But you can't go after George Soros. You're not allowed to do that. Yeah. Dafrax. LOL that ratio. Yes, exactly. 3,151 comments. And if you want the proof for why I made that video, just go read the comments. Like I can go to the video. I don't delete comments. People will say, like often like right-wingers will be like, why are you deleting my comment? When in reality, I only delete comments if they're absolutely abhorrent. But more accurately, the reality is that, that link might not Does that link not work? I might have grabbed the wrong link. Let me see. But they definitely hit hard, man. They definitely hit hard. Well, the thing, Brandon, is that with a video like that, I made it, and it must have just had the right words to be searchable on Google and YouTube. And so independent of whether people liked it or not, they found it and they clicked on it. And they watched it for a respectable amount of time to get the clips I put in it. And so when you add those things in, what YouTube cares about more than do they like it is, did they engage with it? And they definitely clicked on it. A lot of people left comments. Likes and dislikes don't count differently from one another, apparently, from engagement. At least that's the prevailing wisdom. And so you add all of that together, and what you have basically is like the reality that the video just kind of blew up like that. Well, yeah, Samantha's right. You can't police a YouTube comment section, but YouTube does have a like spam filter, for lack of a better term, and I don't know exactly what determines what gets in there. I think it's like, profanity and things like that, right? So like, let me see. Like, I wanted to read some of these comments, maybe. It's being weird, but let me. But basically, it's like it's a mixture of things like that. So, like for instance, like the top comment, newsflash: Soros is involved in everything that's going wrong in the U.S. That is not sarcasm, right? George Soros is evil. He's a self-proclaimed enemy of the U.S. F. George Soros. We don't censor on this show, though. That's an attack on them. This was not an apology. We don't censor. This was, I can't. As soon as this dude gave his own opinion, quote unquote, I understood the dislike ratio, right? Came to the apology, stayed to hear an ignorant leftist talk about George Soros. This guy's literally trying to use, I don't even know, right? Wait, was it here? This guy's literally trying to use social justice to ignoring verifiable disturbing facts. Look at the dislikes. What a sniveling little communist. It's not a Jewish thing. They're using him to take off limits. The first rule of George Soros, never talk about George Soros. Oh, come on, who gives a crap? Blah, 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 blah. Like it was by far the craziest video I've ever had. In terms of like the amount of hate. Now I don't read that was actually the first time I read the comments on that video, like beyond like just randomly seeing them as I go through my back end app. But like it was something to behold. It was something to behold. Yeah, some stuff on like triggering MAGA people would be pretty good. But like I worry about like, is that like the best content? Would that be like a content for like a second channel? Things like that. Like if I was to do cuts of like reacting to the worst comments I have, I'm not sure. I'm not sure what the best option would be, but that's something to consider. Something to consider. Right now, looking at Twitter, get rid of the ballots is trending, which is pretty scary. I think very, very concerning. Yeah, that's a good point. Let me see that. Dafrax saying, do what Sam Cedar is doing and trying to do. He wants to exploit the right-wing pipeline by covering IDW/alt-right figures. I mean, yeah, I think that's certainly like an area of interest. It's certainly something I would like to do a little bit more. I've done a little bit about it of it. I've made videos on these sorts of people, but I just, it's just I have so little time. I have to kind of focus on certain topics. It is something that I'd like to do a little bit more. The Surfs do a lot of that. The Surfs, both on Twitch and on their YouTube channel, where they do a lot of edit cuts of their streams. They spend most of their time criticizing the alt-right. They don't cover electoral politics as much as I do, and they spend most of their time critical of Charlie Kirk, Caitlin Bennett, Ben Shapiro, Dave Rubin. The types. You know the types. Tommy Lahren, Candace Owens. I've done some video on Candace Owens, for instance. I've done videos like that. The one benefit of videos like that is that they're less intertwined within the mainstream media silo on YouTube. And as I've said before, one of the challenges of doing left-wing content on politics, or just political content in general, is that you can't how do I put it? YouTube gives fundamental advantages to mainstream news. Whether it's Fox News or MSNBC or CNN or ABC, or even here in Canada, CBC, Global, CTV, they give them fundamental advantages. It's why after watching my videos, you'll often, not always, but more often than not, you won't get another one of my videos in the auto playlist. What you'll get is a video from MSNBC, right? You'll get a video from MSNBC. And so, that makes it harder to grow a political channel on YouTube. And YouTube does that on purpose because they want to funnel people away from content like mine or content like Ben Shapiro. And again, they're not doing I think my content has a much higher value, but, YouTube sees us as not trustworthy news sources, and they want to filter people back to mainstream media. That's what they want to do. Whereas if you cover the right-wing pipeline, like Fox News, MSNBC, CNN, they're not making videos every day about Ben Shapiro. So you're not competing with mainstream news sources in general about these types. You're only competing with other people, independent creators making videos on them, right? So making videos about Biden and Trump, you'll notice today that I put out 2 videos. Do check them out after the stream. I put out 2 videos, one on Fauci and one on Breonna Taylor, and both videos performed extremely poorly. And the reason that is, I think in general, there's probably a lot of reasons, but there's probably a lot of reasons, but one of those reasons, I'm certain, one of those reasons is that YouTube had a whole bunch of competition from MSNBC, CNN making those videos, right? And so my video is getting pushed down the list. You want to see something on Breonna Taylor right now? It's very hard to find my video unless you manually go to my subscribe page and click it, or you were one of the relatively small amount of people that click the notification bell. You know what I mean? Things like that. So it's really tricky. I haven't covered the throne speech yet. I don't know what to say about it. Trudeau didn't really say much at all. He basically outlined a lot of the things he said he was going to do before but never did. And so I don't trust him to do it. And then, I don't know. I don't know. The throne speech is, I mean, I was expecting more because all of the media coverage for the last few weeks really has been Trudeau and Freeland, because Freeland's the new finance minister after Bill Morneau resigned / whatever, got booted, whatever you want to call it. They wanted to be more bold about what's happening. They wanted to get out there and build a bolder Canada coming out of the pandemic, coming out of COVID, and they were going to be really ambitious with their throne speech. Maybe it was going to have a basic income and things like that, but like none of that was in there. None of that was in there. Now, that doesn't mean that they won't come up with some of those things, but it does mean that like they're basically pushing a largely status quo message with their throne speech, right? It was just very much what the Liberals have been doing or said they would do but haven't been doing. So, honestly, it's like was it like an awful speech? I mean, not really, because like it wasn't eventful enough to be awful, but it certainly wasn't great. Zachary says, Christo, do you think Jagmeet will support the Liberals during the confidence vote? That's an interesting question. I'm not sure. My inkling is that he knows a lot of people are not ready for an election, especially a lot of NDP voters. And so I wonder if he knows it's not the right move to make. And there are differences between here and BC, for instance. BC has been in a minority government, a very, very razor-thin minority government for basically 3 years, whereas the Liberals are in a very comfortable minority, and they've been in it for less than 1 year, basically. So, I think there's a lot of concern about an early election, and so I think that Singh is probably leaning towards not pulling the government down. There's other factors here too, right? Like Aaron O'Toole, the Conservative leader, has COVID, and so does the Bloc Québécois leader. Like, are they ready to call an election now, given that they have COVID? I don't know. I know COVID doesn't last forever, but like, it's certainly not like, getting a head cold. And the Green Party is still going through a leadership vote. I don't think an election's going to come. I think that there's going to be a lot of saber rattling, but there's ultimately not going to be an election. I do think the Liberals in general are itching for one soon, but I don't know. I feel like the polling is volatile enough that they're going to be reluctant. Right? They're going to be reluctant. Some of the polls have them winning a majority, but some of the other polls have them basically losing all of their COVID goodwill. And they're basically right back to where they were on election day, which means they would just get another minority, which means there's no point in an election that will piss people off. So I don't know. Oh yeah, don't get me wrong. Like, I'm not like Aaron O'Toole and yeah, they definitely were playing with fire, but they both have COVID, and like it means that like in terms of like pulling the government down over this at this juncture, given that I don't see it. I don't see it. Yeah, it'll be how people portray it. I mean, Jagmeet would have, I think, from a moral perspective, would easily have the ability to say, look, we have myself and my party have cooperated with this government pretty much every step of the way. We've worked to get more people help. We've worked to expand the CERB. We've done all of that. We haven't achieved everything we want, but we're proud of the work we've done. But the government, in failing to protect Canadians as we go into a second wave or whatever, means that we can no longer support the government. It's not about an election. It's about the people of Canada not getting the help they need right here, right now. I understand that argument, but would Canadians see it like that, or would they see it as the NDP pulling down the government? And you have to remember that bullshit as it is, the only way the Liberals fall is if the three main opposition parties all vote them down. Because the Liberals have a minority technically, but it requires the NDP and the Conservatives and the Bloc together. They all three have to pull the government down. And so the argument from the Liberals will definitely be, look at the NDP uniting with the Conservatives to destroy our government. That's what they will argue. Even if they were both voting down the throne speech for different reasons, for diametrically opposed reasons, that would be the argument. I mean, Karen, you're right. There hasn't been enough coverage of it. And one of the challenges, and you see this in the States, but like it's in hyperdrive in Canada in some ways, is that Trudeau has really been able to monopolize media coverage during this pandemic. Before, I mean, the Prime Minister always gets the most media. Like, that's just the way it is, right? Fair or not, every Prime Minister gets the most camera time. Prime Minister can always get camera time whenever he wants it, however he wants it. It's the perk of being Prime Minister. But during this crisis, every day, especially early on, every day at like 11 a.m., like clockwork, he would do like a full press conference and everyone watched it because he would give news about COVID and things like that and the programs and would the border close, how long would it be closed, blah, 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 blah. And he got all this media and effectively the opposition parties, not just the NDP, but the other one, even the Conservatives, basically got no media, basically got no actual like attention for months and months and months. And so Trudeau was able to effectively monopolize the entire coverage. So what would happen actually is the Liberals would propose a shitty plan that left out a bunch of people. And then the NDP would come in, sometimes with the Bloc and the Greens, they would help as well, but predominantly the NDP would come in and say, actually, how about a good plan? And the Liberals were like, we can't give you good, but we can give you less shitty. You know what I mean? Like, and then the NDP's like, okay, well, we're in the middle of a global crisis here, and we need to find something, so it's better than nothing, but we helped achieve it. Let's go with it. And then Trudeau would go to a press conference the next day or the couple days later and say, the government is ready to unveil the expansion of the CERB to include X, Y, and Z. And everyone would be like, oh, look at Trudeau listening to our concerns. When in reality, it was the NDP along with regular people raising a stink that forced the government's hand. But you're right. If the public doesn't know that, if they don't understand that, then they won't vote with that in mind, right? If they don't understand that. It's also like how the public doesn't understand how, it's like the public, how they don't understand how our voting system works when they look at the Liberals in the high 30s and they see the Conservatives at like 29 and they see the NDP at like 20. Those people failing to realize that they need to start voting for the Liberals less and for the NDP more, because they need to realize that the reason the Liberals have not been awful during this crisis is because they have a minority government and they can't just do whatever they want. They don't have, absolute power for 4 years. They actually have to worry, at least hypothetically, about the opposition. And so all these voters, I'm like, no, don't give them a majority. If you're happy with the current government, you need to ensure they don't get any more seats. Paradoxically, the way to make this government better is to give their seats away to other parties. And in fact, I will go so far to say that it would be worth the Liberals losing seats to the Conservatives in particular to make their government weaker to give more leverage to the Greens and the NDP and to a lesser extent the Bloc. Honestly, I would take 10 Liberal MPs and give them right to the Conservatives. It would still leave the Liberals with the most seats. It would still leave the Conservatives out of power. And it would make the Liberals weaker and more dependent on the NDP. So, you know. Yeah, Samantha says, Krista, will I be covering the debate next week? Yeah, I'll certainly be covering it. In terms of a live reaction, I have to be careful. I don't think I'll be able to do it because of copyright. As I noted last week, when I did the live stream of the Democratic Convention, that was possible because that stream was like available to like all media. That was like the Democratic Party putting that out, and basically everyone could simulcast it. And so there was no copyright thing to infringe except for some of the copyrighted music they used. And so for me, it wasn't a big deal. But this debate is going to be aired, I think, on Fox News, and is going to be like a Fox News production. And so I don't know if I'll be able to run it as a live reaction without getting copyright struck here on YouTube. And so at the very least, what I'll do is I will cover it on a post-debate, live stream or something like that. Or a post-debate video. But there will be coverage, and it will almost certainly be immediate after it. And I'll probably be covering it, if I'm not doing a video on it, on Twitter and on social media. Is it on C-SPAN? If it's on C-SPAN, I have to check. C-SPAN is generally pretty good, but technically their copyright is that when they're running coverage of like government business, like when they're covering like a speech on the floor of the Senate, that's not copyrighted. Like that's no one owns a Senate speech. So I could live stream that. I could live stream a reaction to a speech from the Senate floor. But their shows, like, C-SPAN has shows that are not strictly political. I can't cover those live, right? So one thing is Twitch is a little bit more lenient. I don't know how or why with it. I'll ask around and see what other folks are doing with that, because I'm not 100%. But at the very least, like there will be coverage of it. There will 100% be coverage. It's going to be a shit show. Both of these guys are awful. And I don't expect them to hold well under questioning, either from a moderator or like between one another. It's going to be an awful debate. Awful. All right. Let me see. Okay. I have a question here. David asks, Hola, Cristo, do you agree with McCullough? I assume you mean JJ McCullough, that the Governor General should be abolished and Parliament take her tasks, but there's a constitutional reform trauma? Yeah, David. So what David's asking is that here in Canada, we have this weird position that sort of serves the role of a president. Because in Canada, we don't have a president. We don't have our prime minister is not separate. I do have a Twitch account, Zachary. It's just Chris to have at least one. With all one word with one. I just haven't been able to stream on Twitch. I just haven't been able to since the pandemic. I don't have enough time. I don't have enough time. Eventually I'll get into that. I'll definitely get into that. But the Governor General question is so here in Canada, we have our Prime Minister is also a sitting member of our House of Commons. So more accurately, our Prime Minister fills a role sort of like a quasi-democratic majority whip in the House, sort of. It's not quite like Nancy Pelosi because our speaker is a member of parliament, but they're not the leader of it. So it's complicated. We do not have a prime minister that sits separate from our legislature. Our legislative branch and our executive branch are directly intertwined. Almost always, everyone in cabinet is also a member of the House of Commons. So it would be like the person who led the biggest party in the House would be president, and they would select their cabinet from the people in their party in the House of Representatives. Our Senate is appointed and at least quasi-ceremonial. It does have power technically. Every piece of legislation has to go through both houses, like with you guys. But the Senate rarely votes down legislation. They might offer amendments, but they rarely vote it down. And then we have our Governor General. And the Governor General is the Queen's representative in Canada. They are unelected and they are appointed by the Prime Minister, but oddly, they are the boss of the Prime Minister as well. They are ultimately the ones that get to determine whether or not a government survives. When a government can go to them to ask to dissolve Parliament or to pause Parliament, basically, and they ultimately have that choice, but they usually just follow the advice of the Prime Minister, regardless of whether or not, it's good advice in many cases. They're sort of ceremonial. And so what J.J. McCullough, he's a prominent YouTuber, he's a conservative, he's basically saying, look, why do we need this job that doesn't do anything? And it's a good question. And David's right that a lot of this is based on reform. And I think to abolish the Governor General, David, I think that would be considered technically a change to monarchy. And that would likely, from my perspective, probably require constitutional unanimity. It wouldn't be a 750 change. It would be all provinces must agree change. And so I don't know if it's going to get done. So even if you're not like traumatic about constitutional reform, it's just that, will you get everyone to agree? I'm not sure. I certainly don't see the technical need for them to exist. I think, if Canada was a republic, what would likely happen is we would have a president separate from a prime minister. Many European countries have that, where they have the prime minister as the head of government, and then they also have a president who is elected but is quasi-ceremonial. Like Greece has that, for instance. The prime minister is the actual head of government, but the president is head of state, but the person that has the actual power is the prime minister. And that's the way it works in Canada. So I don't know. I mean, certainly I don't see the need for a governor general in a moral sense, but it would require a constitutional change to get rid of them, even if their job is basically meaningless. John Barlage, and sorry, John, I missed your live chat there. I refreshed the screen and then it updated, and I missed your first one, where John says, "Hey, I'm getting my mail-in ballot tomorrow." John, that's great to hear. I hope you're able to get that vote in. Make sure it's balloted right. One thing to note is that some of the states, at least, there's a very particular order in which you have to put your ballot in, because you have to put your ballot in your mailing ballot, but then within that you have a privacy envelope, and if you mix the order up, your vote could be invalidated, because then they technically know who you voted for because they have your name. I'm guessing the way it works is you mail it with your name and address on it, your ballot gets there, and then it's in a nondescript envelope that's identical to everybody else, and that one gets opened to be counted after it's been separated from your actual mail-in slip. And so make sure that's all right. But John, it's great to hear. And John says dementia 2020. I mean, look, neither Trump nor Biden, I think, are fit for office. And this isn't me making a false equivalency. If I was American, as much as it pains me, I'd probably vote for Joe Biden. But the fact of the matter is, neither man is fit for office. And in fact, there was a poll a couple weeks ago that was being reported by like NBC or something, that a majority of Americans see both Trump and Biden as unfit for office. Trump slightly more so, but essentially they're within the margin of error. CMT said I would rather watch the debate next week with you guys. Certainly, I'm gonna look into it and see if I can run it. I'm gonna talk with some other YouTubers to see what the consensus is around copyright with it, and if I feel I can run it safely, I will. If I feel like the channel could get copyright struck, which again has consequences sometimes beyond just the stream gets shut down. I don't want to have adverse effects on the channel. I likely won't live stream the debate, but then in that case, I will live stream a reaction to it. And Ronald 6 Wilson 6 Reagan 6 says, electoral reform and the democratization of our Constitution matter far more than abolishing the monarchy. On an unrelated note, Hawkins 2020. Look, I agree with you. I think in terms of how you actually make change in Canada, and I've talked about this before, right? Like, if give me a majority government where I have absolute power, like everyone in my party will vote for me no matter what, effectively giving the ability to pass any legislation I want, that and I don't have to worry about constitutional amendments. Like, I have support for those too. I likely still don't spend a lot of time on the monarchy because I might only have a few years of this power. Like, I'd say I only have this power, but for like a couple years. I need to focus on healthcare. I need to focus on electoral reform. I need to focus on climate change. I need to focus on police violence. I need to focus on indigenous justice. I need to focus on so much I need to focus on, right? And so getting rid of the monarchy or the governor general, or changing how the monarchy or governor general relates to Canada, is just not something that I could spend a whole lot of, political capital on, even if I had a ton of it. Even if it's something that I would agree with, it's just not that important. And again, here in Canada, I've talked about this. A few people really love the monarchy. A few people really hate the monarchy. And most people, while they might have an opinion, ultimately don't give a fuck. Like, that. Maybe people can agree or disagree in the chat. Like, you'll have a few people that love the monarchy. They're literally a part of like a monarchist society. They're basically like monarchist LARPers. And then you have people that are hardcore Republicans. Not GOP Republicans, but like, they believe in a republic. Those people, they exist, but they're a small group too. Most people give no fucks. So I was thinking, I wouldn't do it. Wouldn't do it. I mean, there are certain things with the Queen that are still relics. In general, Canada's independence process from Britain was gradual, to be clear. So a lot of people talk about 1867 as the birth of Canada, right? Canada became a country in 1867. The first 4 provinces, New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, Ontario, Quebec, formed in that year. And they went from 4 independent British colonies to becoming, well, Quebec and Ontario had already merged into Canada, East and West, what have you. But whatever. Upper, Lower Canada. Basically, Canada formed on that day. And it would gradually expand across, our part of North America over the next, couple generations. But at first, much of our policy was rooted in Britain still. For a long time in Canada, our Supreme Court was not the Supreme Court. If you had a legal case in Canada, like today, you start with your local court, and then you can appeal it, and eventually you'd get to the Supreme Court of Canada. But at that point, you could still go to the the Justice Committee of the Privy Council in Britain, the JCPC, and the British courts were the courts of last appeal in Canada, I believe until the 1930s. And for a long time in Canada as well, technically, our foreign policy was run by the British government. Canada was autonomously governing in its domestic affairs, but its international affairs, again, I think until the 1930s or 40s, were basically connected to England. Now, that didn't necessarily mean we followed them lockstep all the way every time, but it did technically mean that, like, when we had a border dispute with the United States, Britain spoke on our behalf about the dispute and actually sold us out to the Americans a couple times because they wanted the American friendship in the late early 1900s, because they worried about the need to have America as an ally in a future war, which actually turned out to be a good decision given that they played a key role in World War I and World War II. And so that's a bit of a history lesson. But suffice it to say, nowadays, the Queen's role over Canada, even in that regard, theoretically, is very limited. Technically, the Governor General is appointed by the Queen, is the Queen's representative, but the Queen doesn't really have a role to play here. And the final symbolic major thing was in the early 1980s, in 1982, Canada patriated our Constitution. So the British North America Act was passed when Canada was formed, because Canada was British North America. That's what it was called before. All the colonies here were called British North America. There were more than one, but that's what we were called. And when it was formed, they formed the British North America Act. But the British North America Act was actually British law too, and only the British Parliament could amend Canada's constitution. So if Canada wanted to make a constitutional change, the British Parliament had to pass the legislation. And so in the early 1980s, Canada officially patriated the Constitution, and so that we had the ability to change it. And it's no longer connected to Britain. And I would say then, basically, that was the last real formal vestige of Canada's subservience to Britain, was 1982. And so it was gradual before that. Are we talking about our Supreme Court? Our Supreme Court has a retirement at 75, mandatory, I believe. And our Senate as well. Both our Senate is a lifetime appointment. You get appointed to the Senate by a prime minister. And you're appointed you're not a lifetime. You're appointed, you're not elected. You can't be forced out by the voters or whatever. It's undemocratic, but you retire automatically at 75. Whether you've been there for 30 years or whether you've been there for 1 year, it's a mandatory retirement at 75. And our Supreme Court as well. We have 9 Supreme Court justices. They're appointed by the Prime Minister, but they can only serve until they're 75. Our Supreme Court is not as hyper-partisan. Prime Ministers obviously have biases in the judges they pick, but Stephen Harper's judges, the previous Conservative Prime Minister, are not so ideological that they just vote Conservative on every issue. And I would suggest that Trudeau's judges are no less or no more like biased in that sense. Our judges on the Supreme Court are seen as pretty as actually like being relatively neutral parties, if that makes any sense. And so there's a reason why most Canadians couldn't name Supreme Court justices. And I'll be honest, I can't name more than a couple of them. Can't. Doesn't matter. I don't even know who they are. My life doesn't depend on it. They make good decisions. Sometimes they make bad decisions other times. They've made good decisions, some really good ones about labor rights in the last few years. And then they make bad ones every now and then. And you're like, okay, whatever. But it's not like, gay marriage in Canada was legalized through Parliament. Like, we voted on it. And so it's not like the states where literally like the 9 people on the Supreme Court are basically as important as the president, it seems. And so you know who they are. In Canada, that's not the case. It's not the case. And again, with a 75 age retirement, it means that people are less likely to die on the court. It's not a till death appointment. There's more churning on the court, and more judges voluntarily retire on the Canadian court. They're more likely to retire a little bit younger. So our appointment is not a lifetime appointment, but it's not a revocable appointment either. So if you're appointed on the Supreme Court at 50, I don't believe the Prime Minister cannot simply remove a Supreme Court justice they don't like after they come to power. So it's a secured appointment, but only until 75, right? Or the person wants to retire. Yeah, David, they decreed criminalizing sex work was unconstitutional. Yes. But see, there they sort of gave the government a bit of a leeway where what they said was the current way the government criminalizes either the doing of sex work or the purchasing of it is unconstitutional. And so you need to go back to the drawing board and fix it. And you can maybe still criminalize it. But if you criminalize it differently, if you don't criminalize it differently and you go with the status quo, we will basically declare it legal, right? Like it'll be fully decriminalized. And so they'll do something like that in Canada sometimes. For what they'll say is this legislation is unconstitutional, but we understand the potential effects of immediately invalidating a law that could have a lot of adverse effects that maybe are bad. And so we'll give the government a certain amount of time to propose something better and bring it back to us. Samantha says, Christoph, Elise, do you think the Dems should pack the courts and lower court if they win the Senate and the presidency? Oh yeah. They got to pack the courts. Look, Trump was disingenuous. So were the Republicans about how they got 2 of their last 3 justices. You know, and not to mention they put a rapist on for the 3rd. But leave that aside because, again, he is technically innocent until proven guilty. And given that both men running for president are also not clean on that regard, I don't know if we can fully judge Brett Kavanaugh alone on that. But they got Gorsuch because they lied about stopping a vote in 2016. And now they're going to come back on that. I think that the Democrats should pack the court. They should add at least 2 justices to negate Kavanaugh or Gorsuch and whoever this is going to be. Probably Amy Coney Barrett or Amy Barrett Kobe. I don't know. You know who I'm talking about. The lady that's the super right wing. Yeah. Should pack the courts. They also, I don't know about lower courts. I don't know how lower courts work. Maybe I know sometimes there are 3 judge panels. Maybe you make them 5. I don't know. But I know more about the Supreme Court, but definitely pack the Supreme Court. I think that you definitely need to make DC a state immediately. The second the Democrats have the votes in the Senate to do it, they need to make DC a state. Puerto Rico, it's more complicated. Puerto Ricans themselves are not necessarily settled on that question. And it would be colonialist, it would be imperialistic to just decree upon the people of Puerto Rico that they shall be a state. So Puerto Ricans should be able to decide for themselves, but there should be a referendum held, and the referendum's results should be respected. And if they vote for statehood, they should be immediately made a state. That's the very least they can do. A lot of the other things the Democrats should do, but it's going to be harder, like constitutional, right? Like the thing about the Supreme Court and states is that there's no constitutional rule about how many states there needs to be, nor how many Supreme Court justices. So changing those is just an act of law. You just gotta like change legislation, and it just requires a simple vote. But say getting rid of the Electoral College or modifying the Electoral College, that does require a constitutional amendment, and that requires, I believe, 2/3 of the states, which of course means that the Democrats will likely never get that passed, because there's so many small, red states, like Wyoming, Iowa, or Wyoming, Nebraska, North Dakota, South Dakota, these sort of states. I don't know. Those are the big things. Yeah. The opposition. Okay, the opposition to Puerto Rico statehood isn't so much an opposition, but a recognition that Puerto Ricans may not want it. But people in D.C. want statehood, and the argument is 100% white supremacist. You can say whatever it is. The Republicans are opposing it for two reasons. One, it's blind partisanship. They know that that's 2 more senators for the Democrats, and it will be even bluer than Vermont. Like Vermont's like super blue, Hawaii super blue. The DC would be like the bluest state. Like it would be hyper blue. They would never win a senator in DC, ever. They never would. And so that's why they block it. But it's also the fact that a large African American population, of course, lives in the district. And it's about denying that vote. And it's not a coincidence that it would be the only state, I believe, it would be the only state where white people were not the plurality, right? Let me look up DC demographics. Let me look this up. Okay, yeah, here's the thing. There are some states in the U.S., where when you add up all the minorities together, they equal more than white people. I believe states like Hawaii are one of those. You add up all the Pacific Islanders, all the Asian population, and they equal more than the white people. But DC, I believe, is the only state, I think, where white people are not the single biggest ethnic group. In 2018, it says here, whites alone were 42% of DC, and blacks alone were 45%. Now, that doesn't include people, of course, that identify as mixed race. People that identify as mixed race are about 4%. And so it's predominantly, it's plurality black. Whereas even a state like Hawaii, let me look up demographics here. Even a state like Hawaii, that's the only one where Asians and Pacific Islanders are another one. So that would be the only other one, I believe, is Hawaii. So, yeah. Hawaii might be the other one. I don't think the Republicans would want a state where black people effectively have actual majority power or near majority power. 45% of the people in DC are black. That basically gives them, it's near a majority. And then you throw in mixed race people, which are probably in that, given the demographics of that city, of the district, because most people are white or black, are probably half black and half white, or some mixture thereof. Like, people who would identify as black in a cultural sense must be 50% of the population. Yeah, I mean, there's been talks about splitting states. Splitting states is a trickier question for a bunch of reasons. One, there's the idea that do these states want to be splitted? Do they want to be split? How do they want to be split? These are questions that need to be asked. How do you divide powers? How do you divide resources? How do you divide both assets and debts? How, for instance, do you even like little things like you split California, but all of a sudden, how do you decide where the budget for road repairs and snow removal and all these things go? Splitting a state is very complicated, and I wouldn't underestimate the political and logistical difficulties of splitting California, especially if you're going to split it 4 or 5 ways. Maybe you could split it in 2, and then you could make it very clear, like North and South California or whatever, or East and West California, or coastal and interior California or whatever. But I definitely think that splitting is going to be much more difficult than just adding, say, DC, which is an existing long-running community. Somebody asked here about what do you think about thoughts on those withholding their vote and either voting third party or writing in a candidate or opting not to vote at all. I can't vote for Biden because of Tara Reade. I mean, like, my view is, like, look, I don't tell anybody how to vote at all. Well, here's the thing. I tell you not to vote for Trump. Don't vote for Trump. Voting for Trump, like, fuck off, basically. Don't vote for Trump. Especially, I hate this, like, oh, I'm going to punish the DNC by voting for Trump. Fuck that noise. Vote for who you want to vote for. You're still welcomed in my channel. I understand the reasons. I get why people are voting for Biden. I get why people aren't. Like, it's not... Vote how you wish. Democrats can't earn your vote, then it's on them. You know? But I would probably vote for Joe Biden. Especially, again, like, especially if I lived in certain communities in the country. Like, if I lived in California, I probably wouldn't. I lived in Alabama, I probably wouldn't, because you're going to lose anyway. If I lived in Michigan or Wisconsin or Florida or North Carolina or Ohio or any of these states, then I'd probably vote for Joe Biden. I probably would. So that's like my advice, but I'm not compelling you. I do see Donald Trump as extremely dangerous to democracy right now, in a way that maybe I didn't even see him, say, 3 or 4 months ago. He's accelerated. As it's become clearer and clearer, he's losing. And unlike in 2016, where he would be losing for a time and then him and his polls with Hillary would converge and then split again and then converge, he's never not been losing this election since the end of the primaries. He's been losing consistently in basically every poll. The polling is much worse for Trump than in 2016. Doesn't mean he can't win. Doesn't mean the polls can't be wrong. Doesn't mean Biden can't blow this. But Trump has become more and more erratic and desperate. And now he has the power to act on that erraticism and that desperation he didn't have in 2016. If he lost that election, like, Trump's not president. A Democrat is president, and the Republican Party is not yet fully Trump's party before he wins. Trump can whine like a baby, but the Republicans probably cut their losses and fight another day. Trump is president now, and he has the apparatus behind him, and he will try to steal an election. I believe that. So my view is vote for Biden to give an electoral result that's difficult to ignore. But, you know, ultimately the Democrats need to win people's votes. And when a party creates a platform and they pick a candidate, what they're doing is they're setting parameters of voters they have and voters they want to have. And when they picked Biden, who's done what he's done to Tara Reade and other people, or when they picked a candidate that didn't support certain policies, what they've basically said was, we're making a conscious effort to exclude certain people from the left wing of the spectrum in an effort to win other people. And Biden, maybe he's making the right move. Maybe he is. I don't know. I've been wrong before. Maybe he's making the right move. But it's ultimately his choice and the Democratic Party's choice that made that. But I think there's a real imperativeness to defeat Donald Trump. I really do. I really, really do. So I would vote against Trump. That's me. That's me. Justin is saying, dropping in to say, I'm high on weed, trying to get over my lying ex, and that Jugmeat would have handled weed legalization way better. My question, how would Jugmeat have made legalization better of cannabis? One thing to certainly consider is is that, well, first of all, Justin, I hope you're doing okay. Again, if you ever need anything, do reach out. It'll get better. It always does. Enjoy yourself. In terms of legalization, I think Jugmeat would have done a couple things differently. First, he would have probably moved for immediate decriminalization first. Because if you recall, Justin Trudeau came to power in 2015, and then he really didn't legalize and decriminalize marijuana until very far in his term. And so for another 3 years, basically, disproportionately young, black, indigenous people were being criminalized for using marijuana, even though people like Justin Trudeau have admitting to using it without consequences. So they preserved a system of economic and social and racial injustice with regard to who gets to use cannabis products and face consequences or not face consequences. The first step should have been to decriminalize immediately, because I get that legalization is more complicated than just saying you're allowed to do something now. The process of actually legalizing, I get it. Like you have to like set up systems. And so decriminalize first to stop the wall of injustice. Next, you don't just give people the pardon process, you expunge automatically all marijuana related offenses that pertain to individual use. Right? Like or even carte blanche, but the goal was to say we don't want to criminalize individual users of marijuana. So people who are criminalized on routine possession or even small amounts of dealing or small amounts of growing, their charges should be expunged, which again, unlike a pardon, it's a total elimination from your record and you don't have to apply for it and go through rigmarole. It's done automatically so that people who are poor, people who are more likely to be discriminated against by the legal system, likely also face financial and educational and like network barriers to getting a pardon. So I would say that too. In terms of legalization, I would say the NDP definitely would have leaned more into a public model. They definitely would have worked with the provinces on a greater insistence that marijuana be sold or cannabis products be sold through crown corporations owned by the public directly, and that they might have thrown in a unionization labor clause, which is perfectly valid. They could do all sorts of things like that. I don't think they would have sold it at the federal level. Usually the distribution of things like alcohol is provincial, so they would have partnered with the provinces, but I bet they would have pushed for a more public-centered model. But I think the biggest difference is it would have been there. Now, I wonder if the NDP, much like in the U.S., would have considered a racial equity clause. That's something that's interesting because, again, like in the U.S., a lot of people are talking about how, legalizing marijuana is a good thing. It is. It's a good thing. Biden's not doing it for some goddamn reason. But decriminalizing and legalizing is a good thing. But a lot of people are concerned that while black men are sitting in jail or sitting with records for doing something that was never wrong, but was illegal, like white hipster dudes are getting rich off like vintage marijuana strains. And so I think that some provision to ensure that minorities, particularly black and indigenous people who bore the brunt of the discrimination around this drug, would be in positions to profit from its legalization. That might be something more strenuously pushed by the NDP. So I mean, but look, like I mean, in terms of the actual, I don't use cannabis products, so like to me, like some people might disagree. Some people like don't really like the legalized model because they feel like the weed is overpriced and it's not that good, and they actually like the quasi the gray market better than this. I don't know, but see, I don't know. Like I the only drug I use really is alcohol. And that's been legal my whole life, obviously. And so, like, here in Ontario, most of our alcohol is sold through the Liquor Control Board. And so it's a crown corporation. In some parts of Canada, it's either fully public, like in New Brunswick, where I grew up, basically almost all alcohol is sold at liquor stores, mostly. Whereas in, say, Alberta, it's basically all private, like it is in the States. Yeah, no, honestly, Vietnam did fantastic on the coronavirus, guys. Vietnam is not a rich country. It's not a devastatingly poor country, but it's not a rich country. It is a small, very dense country. A lot of people live in Vietnam, and Vietnam is not a large country. Let me look this up. Vietnam is a long country, but a lot of people live in it. Almost 100 million people live in Vietnam. Almost 100 million. And so you can't even make the argument of like density issues. Like it's not a sparsely populated country. And it borders China. Like it literally borders China. I know it doesn't border the region of China affected by the virus originally. Like it doesn't, it's not that close to China in that sense. China's a massive country, but they did fantastically. And like with COVID, what was key was social solidarity, everyone knowing that everyone else was in it together, so no one felt that like you were making sacrifices and others weren't. Those countries wore masks before we did. That was a mistake all Western countries made. We didn't enforce mask wearing. And I think a big factor was contact tracing. Right? Contact tracing. When people did get it, they did a ton of research on everyone that person came into contact with, and then they got those people into isolation, and they were able to nip it in the bud. And I believe to this day, Vietnam has not had a single person die. A country of 96 million people, and not a single person. It's fantastic. They did fantastically. Other countries in Southeast Asia and South Asia did well too. Like South Korea did very well. They did very well. New Zealand did very well, but Vietnam is like a particularly inspiring case, given that they don't have the resources of a South Korea or a New Zealand or a Taiwan even, and they still did very admirably. So guys, I think, Jay asks here, I'm going to read this and then we're going to finish up. It says, why only DC and Puerto Rico? Why not Guam, Saipan, Samoa, Virgin Islands? Well, there's a few factors there. One, with some of these territories, there is, like with Puerto Rico, there might not be a desire to become a state. There are certain things about becoming a state that have greater responsibilities. Some of these territories don't pay a federal tax. Like, so you can't, like, unlike DC, the taxation without representation argument doesn't necessarily apply because DC pays federal tax but doesn't get Senate representation. Some of these areas are also extremely small. The argument for DC in particular is not just that they exist and are not in the Senate, but that DC has more people than a few states, and it's has a vibrant, large, dense economy. Some of these islands are very sparsely populated, and it might be difficult to justify a state for an island nation with 100,000 people on it, as opposed to DC or Puerto Rico, where they have a few 100,000 upwards of a few million. Right? Like, for instance, let's look at American Samoa. American Samoa only has 55,000 people there. They have 55,000, where is it? As of 2020 estimate, 55,212 people live on the island. It would be hard to justify making them a state. Because, to be fair, to be consistent, the argument for DC is that DC is larger than some existing states. And so I think if you're going to make a case for additional jurisdictions beyond DC and Puerto Rico, you would have to likely find a rationale. And I don't think those are big enough. Now, one argument you might make is, what if you combine, say, all of the U.S. Polynesian territories into one super state? Would that work? Maybe, but still, there's not a whole lot of people between them all combined. And then you get to the issue of, do these areas want to be considered a state together? Do they even want that? Would they, it's like taking Puerto Rico and not only making them a state, but say making them part of another state. It's not only a change in your relationship, but a change in your association with other peoples. So, I don't know. And there are other issues too, right? There are other issues with some of these areas. They have different relationships with the United States. The American Samoa is, I believe they have a different relationship with the United States than, let me see this. Also, in Samoa, citizens are not, they're not automatically citizens of the United States. So the people living in Samoa are not actually citizens. They are U.S. nationals, but not citizens. So they can live anywhere in the U.S. because they are nationals, and they may apply for citizenship by naturalization after 3 months living in the U.S., but basically, a national but not a citizen of the United States who has been at any time convicted of an aggravated felony will not be eligible to become a citizen. So basically, they have most of the rights of citizenship, but not all of them. I don't believe that applies to Puerto Rico, however. Puerto Ricans don't have the right to vote for president when they're in Puerto Rico, but as soon as they come to U.S. soil, they're fully recognized, aren't they? So, as it notes here, this is the distinction. Puerto Ricans have been citizens of the U.S., I covered this in a video actually, since 1917. So the distinction is that Samoa and a lot of these other territories in some cases, they have an additional barrier where the populations on those islands are not even voting citizens, whereas in Puerto Rico they are. If you're a Puerto Rican who goes to Miami and moves there, immediately you have the exact same rights as somebody living in Miami. Whereas if you're an American Samoa and you move to Seattle, you are not a citizen and you have to apply for it and pass a citizenship test and things like that. So I can see the distinction between Puerto Rico and other island territories, not currently states. Yeah. So that's the argument. So guys, I think I'm going to wrap up for tonight. This has been great. We normally we go to about 10:30 or so. This has been fantastic. For those who are new, do check out the Discord. Let me get the link. Do check out the Discord. The Discord is a fantastic place to chat with other people who like the channel and just hang out, get some news about the channel, in between streams. If you haven't subscribed, click the subscribe button. And if you've been subscribed but you haven't clicked the bell, please do. Clicking the bell means you're more likely to get a subscription, or a notification when I post a video. If you want to support the channel, the best way to do it, and this is something you can do whether you have money or not, is just watch the videos. Like after this, I have a couple videos posted today. If you haven't watched them yet, go check them out on the channel. If you watch the videos and you watch them through, YouTube will show them to other people, and that's the single biggest thing you could probably do to support the channel. And if you want to do more, you have the ability to support the channel. Many people were generous tonight with super chats. You can also support the channel via Patreon. Become a channel member here on YouTube. You can click the join button on your, just below the video. Or you can make a single one-time donation via PayPal as well. So guys, thanks so much. I will see you next week. Given that the debate, the debate is, I think, the 29th. If I do a stream for that, I'll likely do that, and as well do my regular weekly Wednesday night stream. I'll likely do both. But I'll keep you up to date on whether or not I'm going to stream the debate live, or whether I'm going to do a reaction afterwards, given copyright. So guys, have a good one, and I will see you next week.